Today we are joined by two of the leaders in the ranked choice voting campaign to learn more about the campaign, the case for ranked choice voting, it's a mouthful, their responses to some of the critiques that are now being put out in public about it, and also how to get involved in the coming weeks as we come to the end of this campaign. I want to also thank Emily Reichman and Shira Burns from the Jcrc staff who've done all the back office and the coordinating of this and who are sort of lingering off screen to help us with some of the technology as we go through the program. And I'll say a little more later on about how the audience can ask questions. Some of you have already submitted in advance, and we do have the Q&A box open. But before we get to the audience, let's start with our two guests. Well, I'd like to introduce Evan Falchuk, who is the board chair of the Yes on 2 campaign and a former candidate for Massachusetts governor and the CEO of Village Plan, and Tanisha Sullivan Esquire, the honorary campaign co-chair and the president of the NAACP Boston branch. I'm going to ask you, before we get to the specifics of ranked choice voting, to introduce yourselves and to say a little bit about, beyond your role with this campaign, to actually talk a little about your life, your experience, or what brings you to be so interested and so devoted to the work of democracy and electoral reform. Why don't we start with Evan?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy, and to the Jcrc, and it's a pleasure to be here with Tanisha to talk about this important issue. I'm Evan Falchuk, and I am the board chair of voter choice here in Massachusetts to get Yes on 2 passed. I grew up here in the Boston area in Newton, and as a Jewish person growing up, I really felt a deep connection to the notion of doing good and tried to make the world a better place, to repair the world. My grandfather on my father's side grew up in Russia and had most of his family murdered because they were Jews. And he escaped and made it first to Venezuela and then ultimately sent my father to live here in the States. And the reason that I ran for office in the first place and the reason that I'm so involved in the ranked choice voting campaign is that we can't mess things up in our country. If we see things that aren't working, there's nowhere for us to flee to, nor should we. This is a place where it's supposed to be fair and right and just, and it takes people to be in the struggle and in the fight in order to make that happen. And I've been inspired to see so many other people, especially at this time of great concern about the future of our democracy, to have and committed themselves to ranked choice voting as an act of unity, an act of hope for what the future can bring. So I'm delighted to be here to talk with you all about it.
Thank you. Tanisha, how do you come to the issue of democracy and electoral reform?
Well, first, good afternoon and thank you for having me, Jeremy, and to the entire Jcrc team who worked to put on this, to bring together this convening. I am, just by way of background, as folks have heard, I am the president of the NAACP Boston branch. I'm the volunteer president of the NAACP Boston branch, and professionally I work here in the greater Boston area as an attorney with a biotech company. By way of background, the NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in our country committed to the elimination of systemic racism and racial discrimination. And we have very deep leadership roots at the NAACP here in Boston. Our first national president was Moorfield Story. Kibbe Kaplan served as one of the longest serving chairs of our national board. Walter Carrington was intimately involved in the national desegregation efforts of the NAACP. And so really here locally, we seek to continue that legacy. And of course, voting rights and access has, for over 100 years, been a cornerstone of the work of the NAACP. But before I really dive in, I do want to just amplify for a moment that as an organization, we have not endorsed any candidates, even at the national level, or ballot questions this cycle. That being said, we have been actively engaged in helping to educate voters on the issues, and certainly amplifying the issues and the solutions that are aligned with our values of freedom, justice, and equality for all people. And so my introduction to ranked choice voting came about 3 years ago. I've been a supporter since. I was honored to serve as one of the original signatories to getting the ballot question, to getting the question on the ballot, and now to serve as an honorary co-chair. And that's primarily because I do see ranked choice voting as the implementation of ranked choice voting as an opportunity for us to strengthen our democracy. I definitely, when I think about this work in the electoral space, I think it's critically important that that in order for our democracy to work for everyone, that every eligible voter has the opportunity for their voice, their authentic voice, to truly be heard. And again, I see ranked choice voting as an opportunity for that. I also see, and the data supports, that ranked choice voting brings about greater inclusion. It creates more opportunities for first-time candidates. It creates more opportunities for women, for people of color, to not only get in races, but to also win. But when we have more people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, when we have gender diversity, when we have racial and ethnic diversity reflected in our elected officials, our democracy is stronger and our community is better. As a result. And so I'm super excited about this conversation and hopefully answering some questions that folks may have going forward.
Well, we're definitely seeing questions starting to come in. Great. And you've definitely taken us right into the ranked choice voting and the appeal of it. Before we get into the particulars of how ranked choice voting works, I'm going to throw it over to Evan as well. I think also to ask this question of, for many, as this conversation is emerging and is being played out here in Massachusetts, people certainly see this as a complex technical fix to some electoral problems. And so I'd love for you to speak to what makes ranked choice voting compelling for you as a means for achieving more democratic elections in Massachusetts.
Well, it's a simple fix, and it's a simple upgrade to our democracy. We're living in a time where there's so much division in our politics, where politicians are incentivized to divide rather than to unite, to exclude voices rather than to include them, and where voters feel as if they don't have choices and their voice isn't heard. So the simple fix that ranked choice voting represents changes all the incentives in the system. It makes political leaders, both lawmakers and people running for office, want to reach out and find ways to agree with each other. So if I give a simple example, as a candidate running for office in our current system, if you are knocking on doors, which every good candidate ought to spend a lot of time doing, and you see a sign in front of someone's house for another candidate, you will not knock on that door. In our current system, there's no point in doing it. It's a waste of your time. In a ranked choice election, you actually will go knock on that door and see if you can convince that voter to be their second choice. And what that means is that conversation is going to start with, let's talk about ways in which we can agree on an issue. Let's find ways in which we can find common ground. Today, you pick the issue. The incentive for every elected official and political candidate is to whack the other side on the head with whatever it might be. Find ways to disagree. And I think we saw some of that on television last night. We got to change it. And ranked choice voting is that kind of simple upgrade that Americans are known for that make a huge difference.
Katrina, I don't know if you want to add anything to that about why you are passionate about ranked choice voting.
Oh, as I shared, look, I think that it's critically important for us not just to have an electoral process, period. We, I believe, should be actively seeking to evolve structures in a way that create greater access, greater opportunity, and greater participation from the electorate. And again, I think that ranked choice voting, again, what the data says, I happen to believe it as well, but what the data says is that ranked choice voting also creates greater inclusion in the process. And so, and I do see, I am multitasking, I do see a question in the chat, so I do want to go there. I think that there, and when I see this, I see this issue twofold. I see the expansion of, or the expansion or increase in greater representation in the pool of candidates. And then I also see an opportunity when it comes to who's actually winning, winning these seats. The pool of candidates in any election cycle, in any campaign, matters. Having robust, competitive elections is an important, a critical component of our democracy, because when it works well, it means that there's rigorous debate. It means that there are conversations in community where we have the opportunity to share with candidates what our hopes, our dreams, our concerns, our fears might be, and they have an opportunity to share with us a compelling vision for how they're going to lead going forward in addressing those, right? And so having a system that encourages the expansion, the increase of the pool of candidates is better for all of us, for our democracy. And then when you look at the data and you see that it also, when we do have a greater pool, a bigger pool, and people have the opportunity to share, and there's more engagement with community, we see that people are more inclined to elect more women, to elect more people of color, more people with diverse opinions and perspectives on how we as a community can move forward. That's exciting to me. Yeah. That is exciting.
And maybe we'll pick this up when we get more into the Q&A and discussion. I would add, and we've certainly seen this in some recent congressional races in Massachusetts, it encourages candidates to appeal to all the voters in the district and not just to carve off like a 20% subset that they are targeting and mobilizing. So before we get more into like questions about ranked choice voting, the critique and the audience, it's great. I hope that addressed Mike, who's a great leader in our community, his question. Love to get into the particulars. People are wondering how ranked choice voting works. And why don't we show a brief video, it's 1 minute, that has been prepared by the Yes on 2 campaign to explain what we're talking about. Emily?
Pick your favorite color.
The ranked choice voting way.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to rank your top 3.
Well, purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither of those wins, I guess I can live with orange.
Now, let's count up everybody's votes.
Under ranked choice voting rules, it's not enough just to get the most votes. You need a majority.
More than 50% of the votes.
Purple's ahead, but it has only 7 votes.
It needs at least 11 to win.
So we eliminate the color in last place.
Sorry, orange fans, we're going to your second choice.
2 more for green.
1 for purple.
But no color has 11 votes yet.
Still no majority.
Bye-bye,
blue.
1 more for purple.
4 for green.
And we have a winner.
The ranked choice voting way.
Excellent. So that's how ranked choice voting works in practice. Tanisha and Evan, anything you want to add on the sort of the structure, how a ranked choice voting process works? And then we'll get into some of the critiques.
It's as a voter, it's very simple, because when you go in and get your ballot, you're going to see all the candidates, and you have a bubble to fill in: first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. If you're a voter that does not want to rank their candidates or doesn't want to rank all the candidates, you are completely free to do that. It is totally your choice. But as you can see, what it does is, if you like a candidate a lot, but you're worried they can't win, today in the current system, you're going to try to figure out who you think is going to win, and you're going to vote for them. Like when I ran back in 2014 as an independent, I met so many voters that said, I like you, but I can't vote for you because you don't have a chance to win. Or if I vote for you, it might change the outcome because you would otherwise be a spoiler. Well, in a ranked choice election, if someone liked me or whoever it might be, if it was Tanisha running one day, you'd be able to say, I'm going to vote for that person first, and then I'll use my backup for these subsequent choices. So it gets rid of the problem of spoilers. It opens up the race to as many candidates as want to run. There's no pressure to drop out. One other comment: in the 4th congressional district race that Jeremy was mentioning, that's to succeed Joe Kennedy, the race that Jake Auchincloss just won. He won with 22% of the vote, which means that 78% of people voted for others. Now, he won fair and square under the rules as they're currently set up, but it would have been much more interesting to find out the true preferences of the voters. And there were 2 candidates who dropped out before election day, and they said they felt that they needed to get out because they were worried about splitting votes among other candidates. So it's not really democracy when we have people having to strategize as voters as to who makes sense to vote for, not based on their preference, but rather some sort of strategic thinking. And it's not really democracy when candidates have to decide whether to stay in the race or even run in the first place based on how it might affect the outcome. So as you can see from the video, it's simple. Voters can handle this, and it's a needed upgrade to our democracy.
Yeah, I concur. It is simple, and certainly aligned with what we encourage voters to do in any election cycle. Get to know all of the candidates and make your selection. What ranked choice voting allows for people to do is to get to know all of the candidates and then to rank the candidates based on the way that the candidates, align with the values of the voters. It is an incredibly empowering process for the voters. The other piece is, and I wrote down a note because I want to really emphasize a point that you raised, Jeremy, as well, in terms of its impact on campaigning, right? I think that's critically important because candidates know that or come to an understanding that they need to connect with all voters, not just those on the extremes. Particularly, I think in primaries, this is helpful because it can help to limit the sometimes divisive nature of the campaign process, because not only are candidates understanding that they're vying for the first, second, third, or however many options people have vote, but they're also, because of the structure of this process, where a candidate must receive a majority of the vote in order to be declared the winner, they're also more inclined to have a connection with the voters after the election, right? And so when you have a process where people don't feel as if their vote didn't count, or they really can't stand whoever won, when you have a process where there's more consensus around the leadership, then we're also more likely to have people continue to be engaged in our democracy after the election to help, again, strengthen our communities.
And we'll get to a couple more questions, but since we've already brought up this issue of the complexity question, which some people have said it's very complicated. You have to learn about all the candidates. And I just want to lift up, Sam noted in the Q&A, hi Sam, that he did this exercise with his wonderful 8-year-old daughter, who I adore, and she totally got it with Post-it notes on their dining room wall. And I would add to that, I live in Cambridge. Personally, like I've been voting ranked choice voting in city council races as long as I've lived here. And it's just, I get to research the candidates and go in and figure out which are my preferred candidates and which are my next preferred candidates. Versus, I can't tell you, in the month of August, how many calls I got from friends in the 4th congressional district who were like, where are the polling numbers? Can we see the internal polls of the campaigns so that we know how not to waste our votes? And the average voter, I mean, we saw it in the 4th, we saw it on the North Shore 2 years ago. We've seen it over and over again that, when voters are like literally trying to become political campaign experts and get access to internal polling just to figure out how not to waste a vote, that's a lot of energy going into a very complicated topic before voting. So this is definitely, I agree with both of you, something that's in a lot of ways much less complicated, and it's just different, and different is change, and change, it's a new muscle. But let's talk about cost, because that's something that's come up in some of the critique that implementing this in Massachusetts is going to be costly. And there's also a question about which races this will apply to, because it doesn't apply to every race on the ballot. And so let's just explain which races this will apply to, if and hopefully when it's adopted in November, when it's going to actually come into play and what it's going to cost to do that, or at least the critique around that.
Sure. So it applies to any single winner race in Massachusetts. So it's state legislative races. So for the state house and the state senate, for the state constitutional offices, so governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, auditor, attorney general, and for the congressional races, so US Congress, and for the US Senate. So all those races. And then your other question was about the cost. Look, this kind of stuff has been used for more than 100 years in different parts of the world. The most recent example of it being used that is most relevant to Massachusetts is Maine. Maine passed ranked choice voting in 2016. They ran their first ranked choice congressional election in 2018. Voters really liked it, got extremely high polling numbers. People did not only not find it confusing, they said it was simple, easy, and they liked the fact that they could rank the candidates. That race, by the way, you had a Democrat, Republican, and 2 independents. All right, so people got to make choices, and it made for a very open, vibrant conversation during the race. There were a lot of concerns raised by opponents of ranked choice voting that it was going to cost millions and millions of dollars to run that race. It ended up costing an additional $100,000, $104,000 to be exact, in order to run that race. There was some software upgrades that had to happen at the state level that cost a total of $23,000. So we're talking about 6 figures, low 6 figures, $130,000 to implement ranked choice voting in the whole state of Maine. Massachusetts, we've spent a lot of time with clerks all across the Commonwealth and with the Secretary of State's office. And the machines that we have, by and large, can be used for ranked choice voting. And there might be some expenses associated with it, but nothing very significant. By the way, there's federal funds that were appropriated as part of the Recovery Act back in 2008 that are for election modernization. And there's about $40 million that's there available to the extent we need funds from the federal government to be spent on election upgrades. So look, the cost is not significant. You should not let anyone tell you that that's a reason not to do this. The simplicity is there, and the races that it will affect are all going to be greatly improved by ranked choice voting.
Tanisha, you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, no, I of course, I agree with what Evan had to say, but I mean, it's fact-based, so what's there to disagree with? But I would add, I think what caught my attention when Evan was talking about the congressional race in Maine, where we had where they had, a Democrat, a Republican, and 2 independents. What caught my attention there was, once again, and Evan brought this up earlier in his comments, to amplify the fact that here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have an overwhelming percentage of us who are unenrolled. We are what in other places would be considered independents. Most of us, unless we're forced to in a primary, aren't inclined to be registered a Democrat or registered a Republican, or, we prefer here in Massachusetts to be unenrolled. And I think that's an important point, especially again, when we're talking about ranked choice voting. Again, to Evan's earlier comment, this also creates an opportunity for folks who are, independent or may not be inclined to self-identify as a Democrat or Republican candidate, to also have a real opportunity to potentially not just get in a race, but also win a race.
Great. And I want to thank Cindy and Mike for those questions. I do have a follow-up, and it's sort of related because, people talk about alternatives to ranked choice voting. And, one of those alternatives that people suggest is certainly to have runoff elections. So why not just have a runoff between, let's say in the 4th, why not just have a runoff, say 2 weeks, 4 weeks later between the top 2 vote getters? Wouldn't that solve some of the issues that we are concerned about here?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that what's on the ballot is ranked choice voting. So there's no effort to create that kind of a runoff. But look, in places where runoff elections happen, one of the realities of runoff elections is that you're running a whole new election. And so there's a lot of costs associated with running a whole new election. Turnout in runoff elections tends to drop really significantly from the initial election. So we're not really capturing the majority of voters. So to the extent what we're trying to do is solve for the issue of how do we get more voters engaged, involved? How do we find out what the majority of voters really want? It doesn't do as good a job to have runoff elections instead of to do it as what this is really is an instant runoff. So just do it all at once. Make everybody get out there, make their case, get people to rank the candidates. People can do that. And then we'll know on after that election who the winners are. So it's a far superior solution to runoff elections. And again, that's what's on the ballot, and it's what we all should be voting for.
Tanisha, you want to add anything?
No, thank you.
I would say on that point, I appreciate you bringing up the cost again as one of the issues, because it's not just the cost to like running the second election. I worked for many years in New York City government and politics, and there we have municipal runoffs for many, many years, although they've now switched to ranked choice voting recently in New York. But when I was working in politics there, you had candidates in the primaries who were raising money for the primary and then for the runoff because you had to be ready. And the result was even more expenses in terms of the campaigns, what they had to, and frankly, more indebted to the donors. You were soliciting a donor for for a primary, for a runoff, and a general at the same time. It actually increases the influence of the money in the politics when you have that kind of system. So it's another aspect of sort of a critique of runoff elections that I personally have seen in practice. So let's, we have some questions in the audience, and for those of you in the audience, just remind you, if you go to the Q&A, the Q&A is open. There's a question from an anonymous person, but I would love Tanisha, for you to address this, and then I'll take Mike Gildersgame has a question about Jcrc and the Jewish perspective, but maybe Tanisha, if you could speak specifically to the NAACP role in supporting ballot questions, and this person is curious about why the NAACP hasn't endorsed ranked choice voting.
Great question. So it is very rare for us as an organization here in the Commonwealth to, well, let me start here. We do not endorse candidates, period. And it is very rare for us to endorse a ballot question. And that's primarily, because as a volunteer-based organization, we do make decisions about how we want to allocate our resources, one. And then two, wanting to make sure certainly that here in the Commonwealth that we are mindful of how I'm speaking for the state, so I'm trying to get this. We are mindful of how across the Commonwealth, our organization members may respond to any particular ballot question. And so it is incredibly rare for us as an organization to endorse any ballot questions whatsoever. That being said, as I mentioned at the top, what we do, and we've done this even on a number of ballot questions that have to do with civil rights and social justice, what we do and where we choose to invest our time and our resources is in moments like this, sharing with voters the issues, sharing with voters why we may support a particular issue, or how we see a particular issue aligning with our values or not. That we do very regularly, both on the issues and as it relates to candidates. But again, we do not endorse candidates, period. And it is highly rare for us to, as an organization, endorse a ballot question, a ballot initiative.
And then since we're talking about specific organizations and constituencies that we serve and represent here, I'll answer Mike's question about Jcrc and ranked choice voting from a Jewish perspective, which is that first and foremost, and I think the broadest, to back it up a little bit, is that from our perspective, a healthy, functioning, vibrant democracy is frankly in the self-interest of Jewish Americans. That are how we have succeeded and what this country has been good for us as a Jewish community is in large part, driven by the ways in which we protect the civil rights of all Americans and the ways in which we have a healthy, functioning democracy for us and for all Americans. And that's how we come to these issues of improving our democracy and protecting our democracy. And then to the particulars of ranked choice voting, I would say, in addition to Evan's observation, this is the opportunity on the ballot here in Massachusetts this year. In general, we do endorse ballot initiatives. We don't endorse every ballot initiative. Obviously there's a question one. We have no position on question one this year, but we have taken a position on this because it goes to core principles of democracy for us. And I would say specifically because we haven't talked about, we talked a little bit about Maine. We've also seen how it improves the civility and the engagement of voters, where candidates are not trying to tear each other down, but to seek commonalities and build bridges. We certainly saw that in San Francisco, which has ranked choice voting, where mayoral candidates were having press conferences to cross-endorse each other. And we certainly hope and believe that the evidence from elsewhere is that it improves civility and engagement with all parts of the electorate and not narrow interests. So that's part of why Jcrc's council has endorsed the ballot referendum. I'd like to go to a specific question that has come up. Kathy Wyman, a member of our board, asked, some have raised a question about the legality and constitutionality of ranked choice voting in Massachusetts. What is the concern, and how do advocates for ranked choice voting address those concerns?
You know, there's been a lot of arguments thrown against the wall up in Maine against ranked choice voting and the constitutionality of ranked choice voting, both at the federal level and at the state level in Maine. And the courts in Maine have found over and over again that under the federal constitution, ranked choice voting is entirely constitutional. And then in the Maine constitution, there is a particular provision that created some issues that they've been trying to work through up in Maine. Massachusetts does not have a constitutional issue with ranked choice voting. Federally, this is totally constitutional. There's no issue. It's completely, since we're at the Jcrc, it's kosher under the Constitution. And under the Massachusetts state constitution, there's a provision that opponents raise that says that the winner of election should be the person that has the largest number of votes. And it's never defined what it means to have the largest number of votes. So we actually have been looking at this for the last couple of years to make sure that our ballot language was written in a way that was consistent with that provision. And what we did is we actually defined what it means to get the most number of votes, which is to say it goes through this particular counting mechanism and reaches that level. All that is a very long way of saying it's constitutional.
So there's a bunch of questions here. I'm going to ask you both to address them. I think we're going to get into like the issues of parties and politics.
Okay.
So I'm going to read a few questions and not try to like, sort of just bundle them around this theme and ask you both. We'll start with Tanisha to address these. One of these is, does ranked choice voting weaken the two-party system? And then another one is, would love to hear how Evan and Tanisha think of how well ranked choice voting will work, particularly given the open primary system we have in Massachusetts. And to the extent that could parties decide to use ranked choice voting for primary elections or decide not to, in terms of parties getting to choose their own candidates. And then I think that gets us into the politics of parties and the impact on parties as political organizations and as able to put their own nominees on the ballot in November. So Tanisha, why don't you get into some of that?
Okay.
What is the impact on parties, on primaries, and particularly given you raised it, our open system?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, for me, the bottom line is ranked choice voting creates more opportunity for the voice and the will of the people to be heard, right? And so I don't really, this question about does it weaken the two-party system, that's really not the question for me. It's the question for me is, does this strengthen our democracy? Does this provide greater empowerment to the electorate? And the answer is yes. And the why on that is because it does increase the potential to expand the pool of potential candidates who can then, again, lift issues, concerns, can speak to issues, concerns, hopes that people may have, and we are better for it. One of the things that happens, especially here in Massachusetts, I mean, we see this, races that are uncontested, because people, to the earlier point, they go to OCPF and they say, oh my God, they have $500,000 in the bank. I've got nothing. How am I going to be able to launch a campaign, right? And so we have uncontested elections here, uncontested primaries here, and ranked choice voting is an opportunity, again, for more people to get into races, to participate in that process, and also for the electorate to have greater choice in who they want to represent them. Any process, in my opinion, any process that allows for the voters to really have their will reflected in the outcome helps to strengthen our democracy, and we're a better community for it.
Great. And I'm going to throw it to Evan and just note I'm having the typical Zoom problem of shaky Wi-Fi. So hopefully you don't lose me for some reason. But Evan, as you think about this issue as you think about this issue in terms of the questions about what the impact is on parties, let's also, you mentioned it briefly, but let's make it explicit. You have run for governor as a candidate, not of one of the two major, we'll call them, parties here in Massachusetts. So how does that and that experience also inform your view of the role of ranked choice voting as it impacts parties?
There's no question it helps independent candidates. And there's no question it helps folks that are outside of the two-party system. But that doesn't mean that that's what it's about, because our support comes from all across the political spectrum. Former Governor Deval Patrick is one of our honorary co-chairs, along with Tanisha. Former Governor Bill Weld is one of our honorary co-chairs. Former Lieutenant Governor, Republican, Carrie Healy is one of our honorary co-chairs. Current Attorney General Maura Healey is one of our honorary co-chairs. I'm sorry, she's one of our endorsers, not one of our honorary co-chairs. Senator Warren has endorsed it. Senator Markey has endorsed it. Joe Kennedy has endorsed it. It goes across the political spectrum and across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Jake Auchincloss, hopefully be our new congressperson from the 4th Congressional District, is a big supporter of ranked choice voting, and he won that election that we talked about. So there is not a notion that even though this helps independent candidates, that the purpose of it is to weaken the two-party system. I think Tanisha said it so well when she said, if we can do things that increase voters' voice, give them more choices, help build consensus, our community is better. And I think the reason we see all these leaders from across the political spectrum coming together to support ranked choice voting is because they know it. You know, we live in a state that has a rich tradition of people working hard to make our democracy better. And again, at a time when we see so much division and so much effort to tear the country apart, to see our leaders in Massachusetts coming together to say we can build stronger and better on the foundation that's already here.
Great. And since you talked about the endorsers, I see a question from Fran about what other organizations have endorsed ranked choice voting, and are there organizations that have declined to endorse? And this is an opportunity also, before you answer that, other organizations either of you want to lift up that are supporters, to point out to our audience, and we'll have this information again later. There is a website, it's yesontorcv.com, and one of the pages there is a list of all the organizations that are supporting. So if you want a total list, this is not a test for the two of you to rattle off every organization on that page, but this is an opportunity for you to lift up some of the other organizations and community groups that are part of the campaign.
I'll just mention a few, because definitely go to yesontorcv.com. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of groups. So they range from groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters, Amplify Latinx, the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. There's a tremendous variety of organizations. Definitely go to yesontorcv.com and you can read all of them. I mean, we had a bill in the legislature. There's over 80 co-sponsors among our elected officials in the legislature. This has a lot of broad-based support in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's one of the things that's most encouraging, is that the support is truly coming from across the Commonwealth, across the ideological spectrum. This is not a partisan issue. Clearly, based on who we are hearing and seeing in support of this. I do want to emphasize again, I know that there are folks out there who continue to think that, oh my gosh, this is going to be hard. I cannot emphasize enough how simple it is. And even more so, how we are already doing ranked choice voting in our day-to-day lives. I was with my parents last week. The weekend before last, we were doing a little work in the yard, and it was time for lunch. And it was like, okay, what are we going to have? And we decided to have sandwiches. My dad was going to the store. And so, my mom and I let him know what we wanted. My mom wanted cheese. My dad said, well, what if they don't have the provolone? And she said, well, if they don't have the provolone, then I want the American. If they don't have the American, then I want the Swiss. And I said, ranked choice voting, there we go. Okay, like we do this every day, and, it's not hard. It's just different. It's just different. And I think, anytime, if we want to really improve our democracy, Jeremy, you said it, it's going to require change. Change is different. And that means that it's just a matter of us, we just have to pivot. But in this instance, the pivot is to something that we're already doing in our daily lives. It's really simple.
And thank you, Tanisha, for that. I think that gets at several questions that are in this queue, including Tanya's about hard to imagine that ranked choice voting can work with more than 5 candidates. There definitely seems to be a concern about just the work that the voter has to do in order to make an informed choice in this system. And I guess, to be fair, there is some simplicity. If I'm like looking at a field of 9 candidates, I'll use the fourth as the example. And I have like, that is my one candidate. And I am like, um, all in day one for one candidate, just believe they're fundamentally like the only possible choice. This is a more complicated system. That is not true of most average voters. And I think there's a lot of anxiety, and I think you started to address that. But if there's anything else that either of you want to say about the particular complexity, because I think that's going to hold a lot of people back. And we're clearly seeing that in the questions here. We're clearly seeing that in the conversation, that this idea of change to something that people aren't familiar with is a concern. And we'll just say that there's a history of ballot questions in Massachusetts. One of the hardest things to get people to is voting for change. The no votes, often people who don't know what it means, they just vote no. So I just hope you can address a little more this whole complexity and change issue.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think voters can rank 5 candidates. And there's data, again, over 100 years worth of data and experience across the United States. There's more than 20 states where people are using ranked choice voting in some form or another, whether it's the state level in Maine, Alabama does it with military and overseas ballots, Minneapolis, St. Paul, you mentioned San Francisco, Oakland, numerous other locations, Cambridge, and so on. Voters can do that. It isn't that complicated. What I will say is 2 other things about this. First of all, you don't have to do it. If you think that you only want to rank 1, rank 1. You want to do 2, do 2. If you're up for doing 5, go for it. 10, your choice. It's America. And the other thing is, let's also compare it to the system as it exists today. If you have a choice between 9 candidates or 5 candidates, you've got to do all the things that we're talking about, right? You have to figure out who you think is going to be the likely winner, worry about whether your vote is going to be wasted. We have a system where those candidates are going to spend their time beating each other over the head, not seeking consensus, negative campaigning, not looking to drive up turnout, but rather focus on getting their base out to vote. So we have, on the one hand, the possibility that something might be a little bit harder than what we currently do, although I don't think it is. And on the other hand, a mountain of evidence of all sorts of really bad things that happen in our current system. And if you're choosing between those 2, I'm going to pick the one that's clearly better, even if it's not perfect. So, ranked choice voting doesn't solve every problem we have in our country. We got a lot of work to do. But ranked choice voting is absolutely positively part of the solution, and voters are more than capable of doing it.
Yeah, I think that, again, the data is clear on ranked choice voting, and how simple it is, how it increases inclusion, how it can help to increase representation. The data is clear. But what you described, Jeremy, is about emotion. It's about how people feel, right? And you're right. I think that when it comes to change, it can be incredibly hard, especially in this instance, when we're talking about changing a system, a way of doing things that we've been doing for literally hundreds of years, right? In the aggregate, okay? I get that. And I don't want to give short shrift to that fear, right? But what I do want to do is encourage folks to lean into the discomfort and not allow the fear to hold us back from progress, okay? When it comes to issues of social justice and civil rights, and I absolutely see this aligned with civil rights issues, right? Civil rights advancement. When it comes to issues of social justice and civil rights in this country, our history has shown us that we have often had that fear of change. What's gonna happen, when we have greater diversity? What's that gonna mean? But our history has also shown us that when we don't allow the fear to hold us back, and we lean into the discomfort, and we trust and we believe that in creating greater opportunity, that our community will be stronger, that we actually are. Okay. So the fear is okay. What I'm hopeful for is that people don't allow the fear to again hold us back. And I encourage people to, again, lean into the discomfort and make a decision to help move us all forward.
So I think that's a great audience question and an answer to wrap up this part of our conversation. We're going to end with one last question, and I'm going to actually came from the audience, but we were hoping to get here at the end as well. Max, great Max, you wrote this. I already have my lawn sign. How else can we get involved with promoting ranked choice voting? So thank you, Max, for already having your lawn sign out there. And my last question to Evan and to Tanisha is how to learn more about ranked choice voting and how to get involved in the Yes on 2 campaign. Because we've got a lot more questions here we're not going to get to today.
Okay, yesontorcv.com has all the information you need about different ways to get involved. If you do not have a lawn sign, go get one. I've got one outside. It's spectacular, and it gets the message out to people. But we need help with phone banking. We've got thousands of volunteers all across the Commonwealth since we can't do door knocking, doing all sorts of other kinds of campaigning, text banking. Really important to talk to your friends and your colleagues and your family. And, you know, I thought the message that Tanisha just was giving was so inspiring and right on about the need to understand that this actually does something good. And if you've got concerns about it, that, okay, well, let's talk through them. There's a lot of ways to explain it. But like, let's get comfortable with change in ways that are positive. There's videos both on that website, and if you go follow us on Twitter, YesOn2RCV on Twitter, you can see us on Facebook as well that you can share. We just had a video that went up today with Jen Lawrence, the actor, who's a passionate advocate of ranked choice voting, giving a terrific unifying message that everybody should look at and share. But, you know, join the thousands of volunteers and just help us inspire the people of Massachusetts to vote yes on 2.
Tanisha.
I agree. You know, for me, this is a bright spot in this election cycle. It's an opportunity to really bring about transformative change for our Commonwealth. And again, to strengthen our communities. And so it's a bright spot. I'm hopeful that people will, as Evan said, you know, visit the campaign website, share the information, have conversations with your family and your friends and within your organizations. And again, it is our hope that that you'll support the campaign and that you'll choose to vote yes on 2.
Thank you both. I'm going to ask Emily to put up, if we can, on the screen the link to yesontorcv.com, just in case, also for anybody who may have hearing challenge who are with us today. And while Emily, we try to put that up on the screen for anybody who wants to see that. I just want to, first of all, thank you both. Thank you both for making the time to do this today and to help explain the campaign and the case for ranked choice voting, but also to really thank you for being leaders in this campaign. I'm personally privileged to be a member of the advisory board for the campaign, and I'm just so grateful to the two of you for the leadership you've given. And I know we were talking before we came on at 12 o'clock, the amount of time you're putting into this, you know, for neither of you, this is your day job. You both work in the private sector, a thing that's not my world, but you know, you're making time out of your life for this in the middle of the day and every day, and it's really greatly appreciated. And just to thank people again for making time for this, and to put in a little bit of a plug, both for Jcrc and for the Yes on 2 campaign, is a way to learn more and get involved. For those of you who registered for this session, you will get a follow-up email, which will have some links in it. We invite you to get involved in Jcrc's work. I apologize we didn't get to every single question. It's great that there were so many questions. If you have additional questions, you're free to send them our way. I think some of them are actually answered both on our website and on the Ranked Choice Voting Yes on 2 website. But educate your friends and family, share information about ranked choice voting on social media, and become a volunteer for the campaign by making phone calls, writing letters to the editor, or you can host a virtual event for the campaign. And there's information on all of that at yesontorcv.com, and we'll include information about how to do those things in our follow-up email. So look for that. And most of all, just remember to vote either vote early by mail or early voting, or to vote on November 3rd. This, I will say, is probably the second most important decision on the ballot this November for us in Massachusetts. Thank you again for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.